Okay, we are back live with another Between the Pages book chat. And today our guest is fantasy author Ryan D. Meier, who's here to talk about his book, The Kept King. So I'm going to turn it over to him now and let him introduce himself. So take it away.
AF, hello everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I'm grateful to be here. As you'd said, Ryan D. Meier. I'm a fantasy author, and I'm very excited to be here today to talk about The Kept King.
Okay, so tell us about what the book's about. Give us an overview.
Yeah, sure. So here, I'll give you a little cover peek. The Kept King.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
Up,
there, there, you got it. Don't worry,
much better.
Everybody gets it wrong the first time. So
That's right. So The Kept King is what I like to consider an interesting fantasy combination. So, whereas previously I had written epic fantasy, uh, this is much more of a fantasy mystery, which um, is I thought an interesting mashup. So, to give you a little bit of background, The Kept King follows a very unreliable narrator. He's Thomas Hawke, our king from Harlow's Hill. It's a very rural farming kingdom. And he's a younger man in his mid 30s. And he finds that he has been stricken since childhood with a very mysterious disease. Um, no known cause, no known cure, and it's very debilitating. So he has these physical kind of like seizures, right? So he's struggling with that, but the real catch is that when he wakes up from these fits, his memories are fractured. So he's going back and losing any sort of short term and some long term memories every time he has one of these episodes. So you get kind of dropped into his story as he's having one of the episodes. And a couple things that you'll find early on is something just doesn't seem right. And that's, of course, you're going to feel that from, chapter 1 on. And that's kind of where the mystery comes in. So he is visited by who is to him a stranger named Kate. And from there, as she comes to the castle, between herself and Thomas, they start unraveling this mystery that stands behind this small kingdom.
well, that sounds interesting and very mysterious.
Yeah, I know. I joke because I found it a little bit difficult to be overtly specific when talking about it because the whole premise of me writing a fantasy mystery is I really wanted to keep the readers on their feet. So with a couple of plot twists that come after that meeting with Kate and Thomas, that's usually as far as I go.
Yeah, it sounds kind of like almost like a fantasy version of Memento, where you've got the missing memories and the different things. Yeah, so that does sound like a fun book. So, what were your reasons for writing the book?
So it was interesting when I wrote Shadows of Creation, which was my debut novel. I wanted to do something a little different before I wrote book 2 of that series, and Memento was certainly something that I had some inspiration from, having watched that movie originally when it came out and a couple times since. But it was interesting. A lot of this book comes from wanting to touch on a couple tropes that I felt that I could do uniquely. And I know it seems a little strange and it's not going to be overtly clear in the story, but one of the topics and tropes that I wanted to tackle was actually a role reversal where you have a king stuck in his keep, the tower, and lo and behold, a woman knight in a knightress in shining armor gets to swoop in and come to his aid. So that was a little bit of like a gender reversal. I joked around in the beginning about trying to work that into a plot where it wasn't obvious, right? Like I want these things to fit the story so well that you don't even notice them necessarily. So that was a topic. Another trope is, the memory trope is pretty classic. You mentioned Mementos from the early 90s. And it's not something necessarily new, but I think the direction the story takes you is unique to itself.
Yeah. Okay. So, tell us a little bit about the main characters. What are they like? Their personalities, flaws, good points, things like that.
Yeah, sure. You're going to follow two main protagonists. So Thomas, the king, which is the perspective that you're going to read throughout the novel, the narrator, and he is his fractured memory is of course going to be play a big part in who he is and his illness. It's something that has consumed his life for as long as he can remember. He has helping hands at the castle through the Order of Acolytes, which is kind of reminiscent of any kingdom that's ever utilized a religious-based support system that kind of help keep the books, help take care of the king, and that sort of thing. So when you follow Thomas, he's kind of at the mercy of his daily routine. Um, he's kind of stuck. He's pretty much can't travel his kingdom with his illness. So, he can conduct business when he's not ill, but otherwise he's kind of stuck. So he unreliable. He talks. I think you're going to find that he's a guy who wishes that he could change his situation, which I think a lot of us can relate to. He's got something that's just out of his control, and it's got a great impact. And I think you'll find that he's always looking for not necessarily a solution to his disease because he doesn't have a lot of confidence that exists, but it's really, he wants to live his life, and he feels like that's not possible. And now, when you have Kate come, Kate is again a mysterious character. You do find some backstory to her, but when you first meet her, you're not really quite sure what to think. She's a very strong female character. You can tell that she operates most things with a plan, which is one of my favorite parts about writing her, is that she's an organized mind. And there's a method to all of her madness when sometimes she's behaving in a way that might not make a whole lot of sense at the time.
That sounds cool.
And then
So,
I'm sorry, I'll just jump in just to lend a little bit of light onto, there's always got to be, it's fantasy, right? So we
mm,
always have to have a bad guy. Bad guy, you're gonna wonder a little bit because there's a couple options, and you'll find that the different options, all three of them have their own unique personalities. So these are all acolytes. You have Meek, who's kind of a squirrely guy, uh, doesn't have a whole lot of confidence in himself, and he tries to take care of the king the best he can. The other two master acolytes, sometimes you're going to question their intentions for sure.
yeah. So that pretty much answered my next question. So, so we'll go on to the one. So, what's the hardest scene that you had to write in the book?
Oh, geez. I've always found that dialogue is something that writes itself easier. And maybe that's just for me. I know every author is going to have their own strengths and weaknesses, but I feel like, dialogue is always a plot driver, right? So it's going to move us forward. When you have, you know, as excuse me, with that being the plot driver, I'm sorry. Can you refresh me where I'm going with this?
Okay, what was the hardest scene or the hardest type of scene for you to have written in the book?
Yeah, thank you. I get talking about dialogue and I'll go on all day. So yeah, so the dialogue is a big driver forward. But in the beginning of the book, prior to introduction to some more of the characters, when you're really just living with the king in his keep, there's not really a whole lot of dialogue for what would be probably the span of 24 hours where you're kind of discovering the routine that the king keeps. So I've always found that some of those times where you're trying to drop character hints, right? Because this is a mystery. So I want to make sure I'm leaving a trail of M&Ms and Skittles for the readers. So, I think that's the most difficult, especially when I was writing a mystery-based novel, is the whole key is you don't want to give it away, but you also have to drop these subtle hints. And I found that those subtle hints are are easiest for me and more disguised when it's not so much in conversation and where it's more something that you're seeing a thought inside of the character's head.
Okay, yeah, I know the foreshadowing can get tricky, all right. Even when you're
Yeah,
not
it sure
writing a
can.
mystery. So, what was the favorite scene that you wrote in the book?
So, and this is, I wonder, when you talk to the readers, if it's something their favorite is. I particularly love the ending. When you follow, this is not much of a spoiler. When you follow King Thomas through the journey, I feel he's a relatable character, and not necessarily because we all struggle with our memories, but because all of us, deep down somewhere, we're all striving to overcome something. So for him, it happens to be this illness, but the ending is really satisfying for me. He was a character that I'm going to always hold pretty dear. I really enjoyed writing his character, and I can tell you the story, although at times it can be a little dark and grim, it is going to end on a note where I think you're going to feel satisfied for our protagonist.
Oh, that's great. So, tell us a little bit about some of the secondary characters. Are any of them a little memorable, a little quirky, maybe steal scenes from the main characters?
Yeah, definitely. So I had mentioned that you have a couple core acolytes that are, they're kind of the helping hands of the castle and the kingdom. When you think about what it would be like for a small kingdom to have a king that, at most of his life has been sort of incapable of um, running the kingdom by himself. So these are people who have surrounded him his whole life, and all three are pretty drastically different personalities. Meek, who is a little bit of comic relief and a little bit of a character that I think most people fall for and just root for him. I think that his quirky personality is he's very timid. There's his boss, so the guy who kind of is the overseer of the acolytes, is abrupt and mean in all business, and the interactions between the two of them, really make Meek an underdog. As far as the master acolytes, Master Oren is kind of like the medical officer, if you will. He tends to the king and his king's illness. And then you have the head acolyte, Milson. And again, he's tough. He runs the kingdom with an iron fist, and he's the one where early on you're really questioning his intentions.
Okay, so how much politics did you put in the novel, or is it more character?
Well, it's interesting that you ask about that. I would say politics I steered a little clear of in this one. That was more of a focus in my epic fantasy series, Shadows of Creation. But um, with politics aside, I do kind of strike at the concept of what we see a lot around us today, which is kind of the commercialization of everything, right? So we live in a world where if something is an asset and has a value, there's always somebody willing to step up and in some cases take advantage of that. So that's an overrunning theme, I think, through the second half of the book, is that there's clearly power with controlling a king, especially a king like this, because he's got a couple unique things. The magic it's not heavy on magic. I should be clear about that, but it does have a unique magic that is tied with no surprise to the illness. There's something odd about it. So, um, when I think about that, yeah, that's kind of that's it.
So, what are your characters afraid of?
Ooh. Thomas, who's confined and lonely. That's his big fear, is that he's going to live out the rest of his life in his castle's keep. Um, no family. His parents, you learn, were deceased when he was a child. So he's been raised in isolation, essentially, between his illness and the acolytes keeping him safe. So uh, I would say that's that.
Hmm. So I'm assuming that sort of ties into the title of the book as well, that isolation bit.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so do you have a favorite character?
From this book particular, or
Yeah, from this book.
so I think that I would relate most to King Thomas. You know, I wrote him as a character of my age because I think that sometimes you have to pick things. Like for me, I always try to pick something about myself that I think I see in the character, and that helps me really put some emotion and feeling behind writing those scenes and those characters. So probably Kate. And I know that sounds funny because I just went on about Thomas and how he's maybe the most similar. And I do like his character very much. But again, he's a product of his environment and what he lives in. Whereas Kate, you have, as you discover more of her backstory and her past, I believe she comes a very, very honorable and respectful character who, she really puts the things that are important to her and the things that she's passionate about ahead of herself. And, you learn that pretty quickly.
Okay, great. So you obviously write fantasy, but are there any other genres that you'd like to dabble in future, or have dabbled in?
Sure. Yeah, fantasy is kind of has always been kind of my favorite thing. It's what I read a lot growing up, and of course that carried right into adulthood for me. So that's where I'm most comfortable. But I do have some intentions later on, maybe not over the next couple years as I get the stories that are in front of me out. But I have a soft spot for sci-fi, big time. I love a good space opera, like the Expanse series is one of my favorite sci-fis. So I enjoy that a lot. And quite honestly, I enjoyed writing a mystery. So I may do that again, but anything that I'm going to do in the near future, I'll fall under the fantasy genre, whether it's epic or mystery again.
Yeah. Yeah, well, maybe one day you'll write a sci-fi mystery.
That's you never know, right?
Yeah. Okay, so I think we'll wrap it up here, and I'll let you tell
Great.
everyone where they can find you and your books.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me. I hope everybody enjoyed The Kept King and Shadows of Creation. You could find right through Amazon. It's also on Kindle Unlimited, so if you take advantage of that, it's right there. You could visit my website. I have some short stories up there at ryandmeier.com. And thanks so much for having me. I enjoyed sharing a little bit about myself.
Okay. Well, thanks for being here. It's a pleasure chatting with you. And Between the Pages Book Chat, we'll be back next weekend with 2 more authors. So join us then. And that's all for now. So bye-bye.